Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Adweek Spotlight. I'm Danny Wright. I am the Chief Brand Officer of Adweek, and I am super proud to present for you today's edition. We're partnered with the Trade Desk, and this is always a great opportunity for us for a number of reasons. Not only is the Trade Desk thought leaders, in and of themselves, all of the executives there. I was recently lucky enough to be in conversation with their CMO, Susan, during Brand Week, which happened last week. And that was an extremely popular session. But what else makes the Trade Desk a wonderful partner is the way they present the content. And here's an example of that. Today's Spotlight is part of the Trade Desk's Groundswell Digital Marketing Festival. This is where they've taken the content that they've created with partners such as Adweek and others, and they put it together in one format, and it's presented at thetradedesk.com. It's really, really well put together, great content, and you're going to have an example of it right here today. We're in day 2 of this 3-day event, so there's still time to register for additional sessions and later today and all of tomorrow. So just go to thetradedesk.com and look for the Groundswell event, and you can register and become a part of the future of media and marketing. Today, we're going to have a great conversation, which is marketing in 2020, which, as you know, is perfect vision. Getting to a data-driven mindset. And again, the Trade Desk is certainly one of the best positioned partners to present this conversation. We're also going to be leading the conversation today is the Trade Desk's Senior Vice President of Client Development. Please welcome to the virtual stage, Jed Dederick. Jed, welcome.
Thank you so much, Danny, and thank you for the partnership with Adweek. Similar sentiment. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm Jed Dederick. I lead global client development for the Trade Desk. And thanks for being here on day 2 of Groundswell. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. It's all about marketing with a data-driven mindset. And I'm joined for this discussion by 2 of the most data-driven marketers I know, in Chappell, Head of Media Communications Planning for the Hershey Company, and Kari, VP of Media at T-Mobile. So thank you both so much for joining us. Kari and Charlie, you guys have such wildly different data assets to talk about and work through. They're equally fun to talk about, honestly, so I really just can't wait to get into it. But before we dig into questions, I just want to set the stage a little bit and say, I'll bet we can all agree that 2020 has been challenging. I am an optimist, I think, by nature. And so in trying to focus on those opportunities and positives, I want to start today's discussion by maybe pointing out a few of what those could be. So just to level set, earlier this year, we hit the pause button. We paused the economy, and that's never happened before. And as markets continue to reopen around the world, marketers have an opportunity to gain share as they launch from an essential standstill. In an earlier panel, we heard leaders from NBC and P&G say that in this new world, they felt a new license for challenging old ways of thinking and changing fast. And that's what we've been focusing on in many of our conversations with our clients at the Trade Desk, is how to build operational flexibility and agility to effectively use advertising to grow and gain share. And for all of them, and I think for us for today's conversation, data-driven advertising in particular, and the shifts to connected television give that operational flexibility as markets open around the world at different rates and in different ways, where that agility is really key. And so with growing economic pressures, I think we can all agree that prioritizing opportunities to be measurable and apply data to prove ROI is just getting more and more important. So one last thing before we dig into the questions was I just want to point to some key findings from research that the Trade Desk recently conducted with Adweek that just support some of this and I think help inform our discussion. So first, programmatic first marketers are significantly better at measuring performance and have higher levels in confidence in achieving optimal ROI. And those who lead with programmatic are 15% more likely to be confident in their advertising ROI. Accurate targeting and measurable media emerged as the 2 top priorities for advertisers today. Connected television is recognized by marketers for its advantages over linear television in terms of data-driven targeting smart retargeting. Marketers plan to significantly increase their investments in connected television. And the number of marketers who plan to commit 50% of their TV budgets to connected TV is set to double over the next 2 years. And then last, and I think important for our conversation, marketers who are programmatic first think of being data-driven as absolutely key to their competitive advantage. And they view their ad spend as having a competitive advantage more often than marketers who aren't committed to programmatic. So with those key points from that research, I want to turn to our panelists, Charlie and Kari, and talk about how they are activating data-driven marketing. So let's just start by saying 2020 has been crazy. Maybe we zoom out and start at a high level. Kari, can you start off and tell us at a high level how you're thinking about data-driven marketing in this world?
Yeah, obviously a beast of a question. And for us, oftentimes it's not the lack of data to drive a decision. It's determining what type of data should we be using to make a decision. And obviously with the impact of COVID-19, the marketplace changed so dynamically and changed at the same time that we went through a merger with Sprint, which naturally just changed the switcher market pool and the industry dynamics. And so it's really been an interesting year to think about, historically the data that we've used, how much confidence do we have in that data to help inform the same decisions that maybe we did, the month prior. We're still catching up and evaluating, different uses of data at the macro level. And also in the in the moment, the data that we're receiving from some of our programmatic buys, and kind of validating the two of them together to ultimately try to come up with the decision. But I would say there's probably more art involved these days than historically.
There's a lot of noise in the data from the past year, right? And it's hard sometimes, we've talked about this, to know what is a short-term signal and what's a long-term signal, right? Charlie, what would you say challenges, progress made in data-driven marketing in this crazy world?
Yeah, for us, when all the shutdown started to hit, it came right into one of our biggest buying seasons, which is the Easter holiday season. I think we had 3 or 4 weeks to go. So we didn't know how consumers were going to behave. We had a big media buy obviously coming up with it, and we lost one of our biggest, sponsorships, which was the NCAA tournament, which just dropped. For us, you talk about the art and the science, we had to make some decisions pretty fast in terms of what we were going to do. We were going to spend more, spend less, spend the same. Where were we going to spend it? And so for us, it was really about looking at the macro trends of where the consumers were going. So we saw the immediate shift into viewership. And at that point in that season, we're trying to reach, just about everybody in the United States, with awareness driving campaigns around that time period. So for us, it was like, okay, where are the consumers going? Where are they spending their time? And, we had to make shifts sort of on the fly, again, without a lot of data, with no precedent in terms of what it was going to do, but had to make it as smart as we could to, get the most out of the season as we could and then see what happens.
Yeah, Charlie, on that point, I'm sure you are experiencing the same. We were looking at changes in consumer kind of behavior and consumption habits on a daily basis.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Where are the eyeballs going? I've never talked about consumption habit changes on a daily basis because usually those are more macro trends. Whereas all of a sudden, big changes in streaming and audio, what role does out of home play? And making those short-term decisions pretty quickly.
Yeah, it was that. It was programming. It was in our case, what are our retail partners going to do? So yeah, it really tested for us. Typically CPG is not known for being very agile. It's the whole set it and forget it on your media plan. And we just had to throw that out the window and say, if there was ever a time where we were going to have to get together and rally and perform in a different way, that's what we had to do. And fortunately for us, it was fairly positive. And I think that built a lot of confidence in us and in our teams to say, we could do this. We could do this differently from how we've done it in the past.
Did you feel that license for change? And do you feel like that's a lasting concept? I mean, you heard, I think it was Linda Yaccarino who said, basically, everybody feels more confident challenging old ways of thinking. And, in this new environment, change being constant, people feel more confident recommending big changes.
Yeah, I think so. There still is that, you still need to have a level of rigor of thought, and to say, so you're not just chasing, whatever the most popular thing that there is going on right now from that standpoint. But yeah, it definitely, I see it as like, okay, the world has changed. Let's look at this differently than how we've done it before.
Yeah. It was really interesting to hear you both talk about a lack of data at the beginning of the process. And Kari, you said that's where the art is really important. It's not just the science, right? I think that's probably always the case with data, and it was probably an extreme example. Would you say?
Absolutely. I mean, we were, it wasn't just channel selection, it was within the channel and day parts and time of day that mattered more or less. And also trying new things, right? When we had, stores shutting down, where, majority of our business transacts in retail, thinking about virtual experiences and having to kind of go with your gut of thinking about how do we service current customers and potentially new customers through digital experiences that don't exist today, and fueling that with, a media investment to see, is it going to work or not? So we had real-time data to help inform those experience journeys, but there is, a leap of faith and investment to even start building something new.
Charlie, you guys lost that physical touch point when I've heard you talk so much about, many of your products are impulse buys, and they're in person. And so I'm sure that similar concept of not having that physical touch point was a huge impact.
Yeah, it was interesting. We actually built an even stronger partnership with the sales part of our organization, because what we needed to understand was how were shoppers, consumers changing their purchase behaviors across all the different channels that we play in. And yes, we'd start to see, okay, people aren't going out and about. So the convenience store channel, which, is a big one for us when our category started going down, but then we started to see the food channel grow. And obviously the growth of the, of people buying online, at the same time. Still, our product is a hard one to buy online because it melts when you ship it, right? And so from that standpoint, so we've seen growth in that, but seeing how that behavior shift, and then how did that then led to how did we change our media plans because people were buying in different channels. So again, it was this, it forced those new connections within the company to be able to say, how are we going to win this thing together? How are we going to come out of this crisis stronger?
That reminds me of something that you've talked about, which is, it's not data for data's sake. It's data for solving specific business use cases, right? So when you deploy data, you think about it to address a business use case. And I thought that was an impactful way to think about this, because more so than ever, there's so much data to sift through and to decide what's meaningful and what's not, and what do we want to invest in. Can you give us some examples of use cases you've tried to apply data to?
One we've done in the past, and going back to this whole idea of around seasons, what happens in this business is, like right now, we've shipped like Halloween candy into all the retailers that are out there. What we're constantly watching is, how is that product selling through? Because the day after Halloween, it's kind of not as relevant anymore. And so one of the use cases for some incredibly granular data was getting data back, from the retail channels, almost at the store level, to say, where is their excess inventory versus their not, and then leveraging things like programmatic media buys to direct more media into those locations where, say, sell-through isn't going as well as we'd wanted to, and it wasn't even a matter of, you can say, okay, well, why isn't that happening? You don't have time in the middle of one of these heightened seasons. You just have to read the data and go. So that was a very clear use case that across the company, everybody could rally around. Fairly granular level of data and analysis and media activation that we're using, for a CPG, you normally wouldn't see. And that's what really got people to start to say, wow, if we start to dig into this data more, what other use cases can we find that could bring incremental commercial value to the company?
I like that use case a lot, and partly because you lean on data that you don't necessarily have on hand. In some cases,
Correct.
You're leaning on partner data, and you're trying to aggregate things. And we talked about some of the gap in relationship to the consumer, and that's something that you guys have to deal with a lot. And so leaning on outside partners sounds like an important component of that. Kari, continuing on this thread of how to invest in technology and in data to build advantage. How do you think about that at T-Mobile?
Yeah, and just to hit on, the use of data, kind of on the other end of the spectrum of knowing, how much to bank on the data that you're receiving more immediately versus the long term. At the beginning, our investment was significant around just telling the story that we've merged with Sprint and now we're one. There's short-term data. We'd probably say don't do it because it's not driving your business today. And so some data you have to look at and have patience because it's not something that anyone's going to act on today or even within a month. So we definitely have to consider like the role that data plays and how quickly you should or shouldn't take action on that. From a technology standpoint, looking at partners that can help us solve and answer questions that help and aid with both short-term and long-term decisions is critical. And I would say, more so now when we're starting to invest in things that are kind of a slower burn, doesn't mean that we're not also relying on short-term decision making and looking at, some ad tech partners to help us manage frequency by, scaling more of the investment through the pipes, or looking at different types of channels that we can actually now see all in one platform versus very dispersed areas. Those are all critical to us. The more consolidation that we can make in a very fragmented world, the more confidence you start having in some of that data.
Yeah, Kari, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, even though we come at it like from the opposite ends in terms of how we see the media work and we prove it out, it's the exact same thing that we're looking at as well. Is the more that we can see across the ecosystem of what's performing, we're able to make smarter, better decisions, both for the short and the long term. And once you see the power of that, you get kind of hungry and you want more. You want to see more of it in that, that one ecosystem so that you can make it all work together better than each individual silo, so to speak.
Yeah, and on this thread of investing, I mean, Charlie, you guys are investing, you're growing, you are hiring. Many aren't right now for obvious reasons. So I'll stop short of asking you how you got that one through your CFO. But how are you viewing investing now in this? Because it's a tough climate to make that case.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen for years the power of media to grow our business. In fact, we talk about media as an engine for growth. Is one of the themes that it's not a cost to be managed. Clearly there's that side of it that you need to do it, but it is a key driver of growth for the business. So as we were, looking at where we need to go into the future, actually, I enjoy hearing more from folks like Kari and her businesses to say, how can we model off of that versus sort of the tried and true CPG way of doing things. And so as we started to do that, we realized that, we needed to invest more, in our own people and operations to be able to start to unlock even more growth. As you get more and more is expected, and so, that's a challenge that we're willing to take on.
And can you talk a little bit about where you're choosing to invest and hire and grow your team, if you're comfortable?
Yeah. I mean, probably the biggest area is what we call sort of integrated media management. We've moved to a model where instead of on my media team, you have channel specific people. You have folks who will work with one particular brand. Like a lot of people don't know, we've got a pretty broad portfolio. So we have a media person who's going to work on Reese's and a separate one who's going to work on Hershey and work with the brand teams to manage, their entire integrated media investment across linear, digital, and now even what we call retailer media. So you've got not only Amazon, but Walmart, Target, Kroger. You can start to buy media through them. And we have to look at it, even more holistically than we ever have before. So we're really building that. So it's really that strategic media leadership thought to be able to put that whole integrated plan together, look at a lot of the different data signals and determine what optimizations and changes we should make.
And Kari, I've said, and I believe T-Mobile and especially with Sprint, have one of the world's greatest data assets, and you haven't taken the approach of many of the other telcos of trying to create your own sort of media walled garden. So can you talk us through a little bit of how you think about investing to deploy that data asset? Where do you think of of internal investment? Where do you think of external investment? Because I think you've approached it in a really nuanced way.
Yeah, our investment is to grow the company, right? And so even though there's some investment made sometimes to kind of foster and develop and reach out to our current customers, the primary role of the media investment is acquisition. And so as we think about, not that the data that we have isn't valuable for that with lookalike modeling and other things that we can do, but we think about the partners that we have. I think that making sure that we have choice in the industry of thinking about different ways and different kind of access points to deploy different types of media. And so, one of the things that's been important to us when we think about our partnerships is not just understanding what they can do for us today and what value they can bring to the investment today, but also thinking about what is on their roadmap. And that's a tricky one because you get sold a lot of things on a roadmap all the time that sounds really good. And you're like, I want to be with that partner because they have a great roadmap. So it's really important as we partner. And, I think that our partnership with Trade Desk has been one of those that it's great to understand what's on the roadmap. But if the partner hasn't been accountable to deliver their roadmap, then they're probably not the right partner for you. And I think, in the onset, before even connected TV and TV type inventory was coming through the pipes, we've had those conversations in advance. We've been like, this is the North Star, this is where we're going. And then to commit to it and see it come to life, you start gaining confidence in that partner's roadmap.
Yeah, Kari, we say on our team, it's easy to put something on a PowerPoint. It's harder to make it real, So to your point about the roadmaps, it's so critical that seeing partners who over time have delivered on their promises is so critical in this space.
For sure. And I think, Kari, you started getting into a really important topic that I want to make sure that we get into this conversation, which is deploying data in connected television, in the living room, and the incredible new opportunity that represents. And I'm glad to hear that you felt like what was on our slides matched up to what came through that. So thank you. T-Mobile and you specifically have been really invested in this topic for a long time, and long before a lot of the consumer changes happened, in March and April. So can you talk a little bit about your approach and how you think about, finding incrementality and how you think about deploying data in that channel?
Yeah, for us, it was, like you said, years ago, thinking about not TV is valuable. Everyone knew kind of TV was valuable to drive our business, but TV content was valuable to us. And regardless of how the consumer was accessing that content through various platforms or screens or subscriptions that they might have, trying to anticipate how would we reach that consumer once they stop viewing in a more traditional linear fashion and start viewing on their own time. So that's what really planted the seed early on for us, knowing that it wasn't necessarily the pipes of delivery that was important, but that content was important. Video asset was important to us, and having that conversation early on, and then a lot of testing and learning along the way, and understanding, how to access that content in a way that was able to manage frequency, which obviously is a big issue, and type of visibility and transparency that we would get by the time you show up somewhere. Because oftentimes there was, 2 to 3 different ways to buy the same inventory, and how are you managing that, and how are their partners managing that? So I think having those conversations early helped us get to where we are today, which is still far from perfect. But I think that having that mentality that became very useful to have once, behavior changed pretty quickly in streaming services and getting that content was peaking, that we were able to kind of fuel an existing strategy.
Yeah, I love the way you talked about the content being the key. And I mean, T-Mobile has been so tentpole oriented and sponsorship oriented over time. And I've loved hearing you talk about, the long-term and the short-term decisions. And obviously things like sponsorships and things like your incredible presence in live sports it has traditionally been a long-term decision. How do you think about the mix of those things after March?
Yeah, I think that as most advertisers that invest in sports, you're now thinking about what's a contingency for me. And, it's not like you can really have a contingency plan for if football didn't happen and NFL didn't, because you're not going to make that up somewhere else. Like that's
Right.
just reality. But to even have those conversations of what would we do in advance, because something like that was just out of the question before, and now it's kind of like could be a reality. You start just brainstorming different ways to be able to speak to consumers and manage some sort of reach against that audience. And I think with the broad-based stuff, that's always going to have a role in our mix, but we've also been really nimble and flexible on short-term opportunities to help elevate our brand in cultural moments, things that are coming at us last minute with our partnerships like with Disney, taking advantage of the thing that we just aired in partnership with them with Vote or Miss Out, airing of Black Panther original, commercial free. Like those are things that we're working with our partners on that are thinking about in the moment versus anything that's programmable and might be, recorded or missed. And so having those brand moments continue to be important to us. Long-term commitments, obviously we have a great partnership with MLB, which is a long-term commitment. We still see that there's value in thinking long-term. I would say just planning for a lot more flexibility than ever before.
Yeah, I've loved your consistent theme about applying judgment to the data and applying the practices of great marketing to the data and not losing sight of what you know to be true because of short-term data. I think it's a real important nugget in this conversation about data-driven marketing. Is there's a way to do data-driven marketing wrong, and some of that has to do with being too short-term in your thinking.
Yeah, and I think one thing that
go ahead,
we haven't necessarily been great at is having patience. And some of those long-term things, like you have to have patience for. And our business is like, what do we do this weekend? And so it's had to instill kind of a different type of discipline to kind of believe in some of the efforts.
Yeah, definitely. Charlie, you guys have had an amazing journey as it relates to television, digital video, and CTV. So do you mind sharing a little bit about the last couple of years with Hershey and trials and tribulations and how far you've come in connected TV?
Yeah, I mean, when I got to the company, about 8 or 9 years ago, it was really interesting because I showed up, the company was doing really well. I wasn't in this job, I was in a different job. But the company was doing mainly linear television and doing it extremely well. 15-second ads are easy to make, in our particular category and can be highly effective. And everyone's kind of like, we're not doing a whole lot of digital right now. And we were doing well amongst our CPG peers, but, eventually that started to shift and the company had to figure out how were we going to start to make that shift. And so at first it was a little bit try everything in the digital space, but then what it fundamentally came down to, it says, okay, well, what really works? And I think Kari hit on this. For us, it was video. Video works. Okay, well, where's the consumer going to consume video if they're not consuming it in linear TV as much anymore? And that led us on this journey to where now we're at looking at connected TV. And I liked how Kari said it. It was the exact same thing for us. This is video. They're consuming it on the same screen. The creative part is simple because you don't change anything. It's just a matter now of let's go follow that consumer. For us, when we started to learn about it, and for us, sort of the long-term versus the short-term is to say, we've got to get in where if the consumer's moving and it's a channel that we haven't used before, we've got to first get in there and start to learn how to make it work for us. And that's where you have to have a bit of the patience because the first time or the second time it might not work, but then say, but we got to go solve this because that's where the consumer is going. And that's what, and I wouldn't say in connected TV, we've solved it yet. We're looking at some of the same things Kari is, that it's like, first of all, where's the consumer and what content, but then how to buy it and how to make those decisions because you can access the inventory so many different ways. This is where like putting it all through sort of one ecosystem you can start to see its advantages because you can move and shift things. You can see how things perform one versus the other much more easily than anything else. And I think we've started to see now how buying connected TV is working, similarly, if not sometimes better than when we do linear TV. And so that just builds the momentum, and then we apply that across the portfolio.
And cross portfolio is really important. I think I would imagine if I'm you, right? Because you don't want Hershey's to eat Reese's lunch or chocolate bar, as it were, in terms of your reach to a single customer, and buying in a fragmented way can really, it's hard to control that, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're somewhat fortunate in the fact that the category itself, I mean, everybody, just think of yourself, your candy consumption over a year, you'll buy different brands at different times. So if our consumers overlap, it's okay, you know, to a certain extent, not completely from that standpoint, but because a lot of people don't realize the breadth of our portfolio, we will sometimes have up to 15 different brands being advertised at one time. And so in doing that, if we find something works on a couple of brands, we want to roll that out to the entire portfolio, because that just generates significantly more sales for the entire company.
Quick question. Do you ever get tired of talking about candy?
No. It's too much fun.
Good.
It puts a smile on people's faces. You know, everyone's talking about what they're going to do for Halloween right now. And it's like, I want to do Halloween. I just don't know how yet. And we're like, well, we got to see where the company's at, you know, for out there. We saw that at Easter. People still want to celebrate. They want to have things that are, you know, sort of bring them back to a sense of normalcy. And there are different occasions that do that. We had a record year for s'mores this summer. You know, and we can directly attribute it to the fact that people were spending more time at home and with family, and we're a part of that. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, my family helped out with that. A lot of s'mores in our house.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
And I've admitted to you my Twizzler addiction. I don't buy lots of candies. I just gorge Twizzlers. Awesome. One topic I also just want to get into. I mean, Kari, we talked a lot about proprietary advantage, how you guys view building proprietary advantage, and I wanted to get your take on how important sort of the open ecosystem and investing in the open ecosystem was to proprietary advantage. I think you've had a nuanced take on that topic, so would you mind sharing a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic in owning things yourself versus looking at kind of outside of your walls and what the opportunities are. I think, you know, there's advantages of looking internally, and if you are owning things yourself, that maybe you can apply some unique data to your ecosystem that you can't do if you went outside. And so definitely advantages. I think that some of the disadvantages and why we kind of balance both, because we do own PushSpring as a ad tech partner. But when we partner, we want to make sure that we have kind of best in breed, that we want to make sure that, you know, the partners that we have are innovating. And sometimes, again, depending on where ad tech sits, if your sole focus is innovating and progressing in that space, you're not fighting for CapEx. You're not fighting to get prioritized within your walls. And that can often spark more innovation than if it's one of the things that your company does. And so I think for us, it's making sure that it's not a one and done thing, that it's constant conversations of the landscape outside of our walls, inside of our walls, of making sure that we're testing and learning, and that we're not stagnant in what we're doing today is the best thing, that the minute that we have something set, we're constantly asking questions and debating and pressure testing ourselves to make sure that we do have what we determine as best in breed, and not making kind of decisions based on, you know, what's easier, but where do we think that innovation is going to lead us in the future, and not just what's performing today.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie, anything you want to add on this topic about investing in the open ecosystem? You've also been a big proponent and taken a lot of action on it.
Yeah, I just think that, you know, out of principle, as an advertiser, the advertisers benefit more from an open ecosystem than one where, you know, a future where, okay, there's 12 closed ecosystems, that's all you have to work with. That would be a really tough place to be as an advertiser. So there are benefits to some of those closed ecosystems, and that's what you have to weigh when you're sort of looking at you talk about short-term and long-term. when you're looking at the short term, deliver this quarter, to deliver this season as we do, you have to do what's best given the environment you have for right now. But then you look at the long term and say, the open ecosystem is going to be better for advertisers at the end of the day. So how can we play a part as an advertiser to help make that happen becomes something that's important to us.
And we started by talking about flexibility and agility, right? And do you think the open ecosystem gives you an advantage in those ways?
Yeah, it's easier to switch faster versus switching from one closed ecosystem to another. I mean, it's not like it's a difference between a month and a day. You know, it's not. I don't want to make it sound way more complicated than what it actually is. But yes, and actually being seasoned and actually being able to make those changes almost. I don't want to say completely relying on algorithms, but seeing that happening and sort of guiding whatever algorithmic approach that you're using as you do this. So you're strategically leading how those changes are happening versus just letting them go. But it's also that you don't have to make some sort of these wholesale changes that you sometimes have to do between the closed ecosystems.
So I put myself in the shoes of a lot of marketers who are faced with difficult reality. You know, it's tough, as Kari pointed out, to cut the signal to the noise and figure out what data to act on. And you've got rapidly changing consumer behaviors. One of the key things that have stopped them from moving has been measurement. In my experience, is they have comfortable ways that they measure their spend. And if they follow the consumers into new forms of media, they're less confident in the forms of measurement that they're going to deploy. So I want to start on the topic of age demo measurement for TV. And Charlie, just because it's such a mainstay in CPG and in mass reach TV buying, what would you say to marketers who are worried about, moving on from age demo buying in mass reach marketing?
Yeah, I mean, my approach is that what we talk about is we don't want to avoid, when it comes from going away from age demo, to get to super small, narrowly defined targets. We are, CPG, Byron Sharp, how brands grow, the numbers, it's hard to ignore. You need to reach just about everybody. In our category, my joke is always that the candy category has actually a higher household penetration than the toilet paper category. It's true by 1 percentage point. I can't explain why, but it's true. So we need to reach just about everybody. But when you're saying, we've gotten brands to get away from saying my target is adults 18 to 49. No, that is your linear TV buying currency. And in linear TV, you're counting on the spillover to get all those people who are over 49. And if you just take that into the digital space, recognize that if the digital media ecosystem is working like it is, you're going to miss all those people who aren't 18 to 49 and they buy your product. So how do you get more sophisticated in your targeting and not just take the linear TV buying currency into this new space and think differently? So a simple one, we had a brand that was saying, I want to target adults 18 to 49 with kids. And I said, why don't you change it to parents with kids within a certain age group? Instead. And it's like, take the 18 to 49 off, take that thinking out, because you're just translating that over from your old TV buying days. And that's sort of the mental shift that we're trying to get everybody to make.
But I think just to put myself in their shoes for a minute, they say, well, how do I know that I got enough reach? And how do I know that it was efficient if I don't buy it in that way?
Yeah. And that's where we're starting to learn to say, how do we, rather than say, we still look like what's the reach of the overall plan, and you have to take that back to their linear TV buying demo just to compare over time. But we're starting to say, what's the reach within some of the more, I call them more sophisticated targets that we do, and how are you achieving that? So you're looking at what it is for the overall plan, but as you're looking at the individual elements, you're looking at the reach that you're achieving within them as well. That's the balance. I wouldn't say we've mastered it yet, but again, it's a more sophisticated level of thinking about reach than I think the industry has done in the past, and that's what we're going to have to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Charlie more. I think, and it's a function that I think us in the industry created for ourselves that we're now battling, of like the demo is just a currency. That is not who you're ultimately trying to go after. It's a way that you're transacting. And we're kind of pedaling back of like trying to explain that now. And it's kind of something that we've done to ourselves. I would say that, not moving into some of these new places is actually just you're limiting your reach. Again, you can use CTV and whatever else for a lot of different ways. You can target more specifically. You can maybe measure differently. There's all these other benefits of narrowing in on your target. But I'd ultimately say if you're going after reach, which T-Mobile, we are the same. Like, we're trying to reach everyone. There's value in reaching everyone across the country. But we're going to miss out on that ability to reach everyone if we're not in these new spaces, right? There are consumers that are not watching linear TV. How are you going to reach them? If video is a tactic that you think is going to help tell your story, then you're missing out an opportunity to get in front of consumers if you're not in these spaces.
Yeah, Kari, our first proof point to the organization before we could did it drive sales or anything else was simply as run connected TV. How much incremental reach are you getting over linear TV? And that was the first sort of obvious thing that people are like, oh, okay. And we had to do that because the reach curves, that the media weren't catching up with what was truly delivering. So we couldn't rely on that. So that's what started to build the momentum. And still we could then later on down the line, again, short-term, long-term, we started to see, oh, and it's actually driving business, and we could start to prove that out. So that's the easiest. That's what I tell anybody who's looking at the space. The first place to start is incremental reach, because it is there. It's pretty, because if the consumer has left, linear TV and moved to streaming, they've made a pretty big shift from that standpoint. So the data tends to prove itself out, at least what we've seen.
Yeah, and I think that some of the modeling that brands might do, it will eventually catch up. It's just a matter of, are you going to wait for it to catch up, and therefore you're going to be kind of starting from scratch to try to understand how to manipulate marketplace, or are you going to start now, even if you start spending at a slower pace to learn and then scale quickly?
Yeah, Kari, I don't think we started in the spaces as far back as you did, but we were so glad when COVID hit and the viewing shifted that we already had some confidence that when we had to make changes, it wasn't like just based on the audience data. It's like, oh, but we figured some of this out already because we got in sooner to start. And it was about learning, what was going to work in the space. So I couldn't agree more.
I just, because we've talked about so much, just for the benefit of people listening, I think we'll keep trying to recap some of the interesting stuff. I hear you guys saying leaning in to being data driven is worth it, even though it's hard and there's a lot of art to the science. Leaning in to the new channels that that consumers are in and watching and consuming media on is hard, but it's worth it. And it helps you build proprietary advantage and ultimately grow faster. Does that sound about right, Charlie?
Yeah, I would say so.
All right. Well, I want to make sure we get to Q&A. So, any final words, Kari, that you want to leave folks with?
I think in the world that we're living in today, one of the things that I always try to keep in mind for myself and definitely encourage my team is just staying curious and asking questions. More questions you're asking about data, the use of data, the ecosystem, it usually leads to more accountability and ultimately just a better use of data. And then also to keep in mind, which is especially true right now, is data doesn't always tell you what to do. Data just helps you make better decisions. And we need to pull up on that every once in a while to make sure that the data you are using, like what level of confidence you have it to make what decision.
I love that. I'm going to use that. Charlie, what about you? Any last words you want to put in?
One of the things I tell my team is embrace the chaos, because that is what provides you opportunity to, gain competitive advantage. Because if you can master what's changing faster than your competitive set can, you'll have a win. Now, it's probably short-lived and you have to keep on that, but it's sort of the rapidly changing landscape is what's exciting to me to go try and figure out, versus say 10 to 20 years ago where it was like spots and dots on a media plan. So I find this much more exciting.
Me too. So there have been a bunch of questions coming in. So thank you everybody who's submitting those. I want to pass it back to Danny to bring those into our discussion.
Sure, Jed. Give me the hard job. You know, there are only a ton of people here today. I mean, the trade desk drew a large audience. Big surprise. It's what you do all the time. And they are extremely intrigued. And we'll get to as many of those as we can now. And we'll also try to get to more of them that we didn't touch on post-event. So let me pull out some of the ones that I find really interesting. Charlie, we're going to point this one in your direction first, but either of you can answer it. But you talked a lot about, kind of reimagining how you do like audience segmentation, right? And not having that kind of retroactive mindset of 18 to 34, this neighborhood, So as we rethink that, do you think we're starting to use data for better attribution? And is that going to help drive investment in new channels and then ensure that we're more effective in driving growth?
Yeah, I think that's part of the job of any media leader on the advertiser side is if you're not looking into how you're going to use data, and I think Kari makes the point as well, and she's got a lot more data than I have, is you got to be careful what data you're using, and in our case, making sure that it's tied. What I have found is when we can tie it to a commercial outcome that is a priority for the business and use it to answer questions in ways that in other parts of maybe it supplements something we're getting in some other part of the company, but is serving that purpose. That's exactly what it is. And then when you talk about getting into new channels, that's exactly what we're going to go do. So anytime now, we've had a couple of these instances where we've looked at new channels, we figured out how to use data to prove whether they work or not, or the right way to use them is probably the better terminology. So now when new things show up, it's like, okay, we know the game plan for how to assess this new thing that's just showed up. And the partner comes in and it's like, this is how we're going to do it if you're going to work with the Hershey company. And that builds confidence within the organization that as the landscape shifts, we'll be able to figure it out. We don't know what the answer is today, but we have a process that we go to figure out how we need to change things so that we can continue to be successful.
And that's adjusting your ultimate, your KPIs and your measuring tactics and the goals you're looking for, that the entire thing is adjusting at the same time, and you're directing your agencies to follow suit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in one way, I always say that like my job at the end of the day is to make our US president's bonus as high as possible, which means basically he's measured on sales, share, and profit. So am I. It's not on any other media metric other than that. Then we find the media KPIs that help us drive towards that. And that's how we serve the commercial objectives and get into, a place of where of strategic importance within the entire enterprise.
Okay. So you know what, Kari, before you jump in, there's another question that obviously, again, you both can answer, but I want to point this one your direction first. You both mentioned new models of operation. And so yesterday, the panelists, both media owner and advertiser, said they were not going back to the old upfront model. So is this a statement that you agree with? And can either of you mention how the changes in your strategy this year pan that out? So Kari, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think that I don't believe in that, maybe the extreme there. And I think that different brands and advertisers have different advantages in the marketplace based on size and capabilities, that you're able to do things that maybe others can't. I think that the upfront model is changing. Like, for sure it's changing. This year was a perfect example of, a forced change that had to happen. I still think that there is value in an upfront type of model. But I think that as inventory and sources of how it's sourced, how consumers are consuming it, the role that ad tech plays, once you are able to transact in inventory in a different way. I think that the evolution of the upfront is just transacting on a different set of inventory versus the whole thing, right? There's still going to be value in, like, for us MLB partners, I know I want to be in the World Series, I know I want to be in MLB, there's knowns about the inventory that I want, and I want to ensure that I'm showing up in a significant way. So I would say live programming, news and sports, like that might be the future of upfronts. Everything else you can transact using data and ad tech and model it as you will. So I think it's definitely changing. I wouldn't go to the extreme and say it's going away. I think that it's just probably this is aiding in a step change in the type of inventory that is included in an upfront.
Kari, the Yankees want to get to the World Series. Anything you can do to ensure that happens? That's okay. Charlie, you want to take a stab at that, or should we go to the next question?
Sure. I mean, we actually moved to the calendar upfront a number of years ago to better align with our fiscal year. I actually, before Hershey, I worked at P&G, so I understand the immensity and the enormity, what they can bring and why they can make the moves that they're doing. And it's funny because they're actually
you get startup mentality. You get.
Oh yeah, completely. And in their fiscal, to me, it's so much easier to line our annual commitments up with our fiscal year because that's how my CFO thinks. And he's like, so like when we moved, that was one of the reasons why we moved to the calendar upfront a long time ago for simplicity's sake. So yeah, I agree with Kari. I think it's going to look very different. And I think it's I'm anxious to see which of the networks want to change and take advantage of that change versus sticking to the old ways of doing things to protect a business model.
Okay. Can I give one to Jed? Jed, you ready?
Shoot.
Yeah, you should take one.
Do my
Jed.
best.
Come on.
So
this wasn't part of the prep.
I know, but you're sharp. We're going to keep you on your toes. Do most marketers, present company excluded, because clearly they get it, but do most marketers have a clear data strategy? And do they understand data and technology assets and what they can fully do with them? And for those that maybe don't, what are some things that you can do as a solution provider to help move them along? And then part B will be for Kari and Charlie.
Yeah, I think the majority of marketers we work with understand the importance, but they're sifting through some of the same questions that you heard Kari and Charlie give really useful perspective on. So either they have an overconfidence and overfocus on the data asset at hand, or they don't understand and haven't really started to meaningfully deploy their data assets. And so the advice I would give would be to follow some of the things that you heard these guys talk about, which is meaningful outside consultation with partners who are very good at deploying data assets. So that can certainly be ad tech companies, that can certainly be ad agencies with a proven track record of doing that. I think that is very much peer set. There's a bunch of marketers who have a lot of sort of trials and tribulations in doing this, and just start thinking about how to do it. I think everybody understands how important it is. I think some people are frozen with fear. I think some people have thrown money at the problem, and that doesn't necessarily lend itself to the best end results. But I do think curiosity, to Kari's point, and consultation with a bunch of parties who have been doing it for a long time would be my advice.
Great. And also tune into Groundswell, right? Because a lot of the questions are being answered right here. Right. Okay, so part B. Do you think that your teams, Charlie and Kari, and the resources that you have, or do you have the resources that you have, and are your teams trained up in this rapidly evolving environment? Let's start with Charlie, and then Kari, you'll get the last word.
Sure. I would say it is a continual evolution, and we sort of see what's next on the horizon, get the resources, get the training to be able to do that. And then it's the whole adage of you peel back to the onion to the next layer, to the next layer. So I'd say we've been on a year by year getting more sophisticated but being very pinpointed in where we want to get more sophisticated every year versus trying to boil the ocean of all the potential data that we could look at. It's actually part of our sort of media strategy session every year where we're saying, okay, for 21, where do we want to focus in this particular area to build on what we've done to date? I
would say a key area that we are focusing on growing is the media analytics internally. So that has been, I would say, more of a gap for us to really start marrying the media investment to our business. And we really have kind of underutilized, and I think there's a lot of work to be done there. So we are hiring for kind of that resource to help us determine what's working, what's not working internally.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Kari. Like people will bring up the in-housing discussion all the time, and I'm like, I want in-housing analytics is
Yeah.
probably my biggest area, because we have the variable sales that no one else has. And so from that standpoint, I feel like I'm with you 100%.
Yeah, I feel like without the analytics piece, that fuels strategy, it fuels planning, it fuels buying and activation. And until you have, that built out in any kind of significant way, I'd rather give up kind of resources in the planning strategy side until I get the analytics support that I need.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's do one lightning round really quick. What's one word that you would use to describe or encapsulate what your main focus is going to be given the challenge of this year? What's your main focus going to be going forward? Like just one word. Let's start with you, Jed.
Main focus will be, let's say, I'll go with flexibility. I'm going to work with our clients and our internal teams on flexibility.
Great. Charlie?
Yeah, agility. It's the same idea. I don't know, Kari, if you're going to have the same thing, but.
Yeah. I think that we've actually been pretty agile. I would say, just maybe two words, but solidify more of the measurement side. So measurement, and a roadmap for that. I think that, as we've talked about, things are different. Our marketplace is different just from the industry standpoint, but the wireless industry was disrupted this year as well, with one less national wireless consumer. Like, we have to rethink what are we deeming successful and how are we going to measure.
And if I may, I'm just going to go with thankful. When times are tough, the human spirit always seems to prevail in a way that is positive and benevolent, and it continues to give me hope. So thank you for being here today and sharing your brilliance, the three of you. I really, really appreciate the insight. Thanks to the Trade Desk for being partners with Adweek once again on an incredible program. And make sure that you do tune in and register for Groundswell. That's a digital marketing festival presented by the Trade Desk. There are still conversations happening today and tomorrow, so that it's time to register. You will learn about important topics in our industry, including measurement, identity, employee engagement, and what the future holds for brands. So please go to thetradedesk.com and make sure that you sign up. And one more time, a big, big thank you and a big round of virtual applause for the Trade Desk. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Kari, for being here today. Thank you, Jed, for doing a wonderful job. We hope to see you at an Adweek Spotlight event very soon. And we hope that this broadcast has found you healthy, happy, and safe. Good day, everyone.